I have this very specific image I want to plant in your head to start this deep dive today, and I promise you, it is not what you're expecting at all.
Okay, color me intrigued. Are we talking like a red carpet, a movie set?
Completely the opposite. It's late 1990s Britain. We are inside a flat, probably a bit drafty, you know how they get. And there's a young woman, she's only 27 years old, just curled up on a sofa,
Right.
and she is absolutely miserable with a cold. She's clutching a mug of you know that lemon powder cold medicine everyone in the UK drinks when they have the flu?
Oh, yeah, the classic.
Exactly. And she looks, according to the reporter sitting with her for this independent interview, Hetty Judah. She looks like a wounded bird.
A wounded bird. Okay, that sounds incredibly normal, almost boringly normal. Who exactly are we looking at?
We are looking at Charmaine Sinclair.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At that specific moment, she was arguably one of the most famous or maybe infamous women in the United Kingdom. A woman whose face and body had been plastered across millions of magazine covers, newspapers, and VHS tapes for an entire decade.
That is quite the contrast. The Limelight paradox, if you will.
The Lemsip paradox, I love that. And that image, the wounded bird with the cold medicine, is exactly why we are doing this deep dive. Our mission today is to look past the magazine covers, because for 10 years, the public consumed the fantasy of Charmaine Sinclair, but they seemingly had zero interest in the human being holding that mug.
It's so interesting you start there, because if you look at our source material today, the interviews, her biographies, this isn't really a story about glamour modeling at all.
No.
Not really. It's a story about economics. It's about race in 1970s suburbia, and it's a case study on the brutal machinery of the British tabloid press in the 90s. Sinclair is just the lens we're viewing all of that through.
Well, let's widen that lens then, because I think for you listening, if you know the name, you probably know the headlines, you know the adult industry label. But you probably don't know about Chertsey, Surrey in 1971.
Right. To understand the 27-year-old with the cold, you really have to understand the kid born on April 23, 1971, Charmaine Sinclair. And her demographics, her background, immediately set her apart. She was of mixed heritage. Her parents were Jamaican and Portuguese-Indian.
And in the UK today, that's just a beautiful mix. But in 1970s Surrey,
It was incredibly isolating. The sources are very specific about this. She described her childhood as being part of the only black family in a very, very white area.
that must have been a really heavy burden for a kid.
It was. She talks about the severe bullying she faced at school. And it wasn't just general kids being mean. It was specifically about her color. She was made to feel like an absolute outsider in her own neighborhood.
I was reading through her quotes on this, and there's this heartbreaking admission she makes. She says she looked around and saw that the blonde, blue-eyed girls were the ones who were considered valuable.
Yes.
They were the ones the boys chased. They were the standard.
That is the crucial psychological context for everything that follows. She felt completely alienated. She actually developed this coping mechanism where she became a huge tomboy, played football, hung out with the boys.
Just to fit in somehow.
Exactly. Not to date them, but to be one of the lads. Because she felt she couldn't compete in the beauty department. The culture around her essentially told her that the girly girl role was reserved for white girls.
So you have this deep-seated feeling of, I don't fit in, I am not what is considered attractive here. And then she hits 16.
The year everything changes. She's working as a trainee hairdresser.
The classic first job.
Absolutely. She's sweeping hair, washing towels, and she's earning about 35 pounds a week, which, even in the late 80s, is barely pocket money. It's a real grind.
And then the offer comes in.
Someone suggests she try modeling. And the rate isn't 35 pounds a week. It's 200 pounds for a single job.
I mean, if you just do the math on that, that's nearly 6 weeks of sweeping hair for one day of standing in front of a camera.
Mathematically, it's a total no-brainer. But psychologically, that's where the real hook was. When she started getting these glamour modeling gigs, something shifted. She said it was the first time in her entire life she felt she fit in.
Because the camera didn't care about the Surrey suburbs beauty standards.
Exactly. She said, they were making me feel a way I hadn't felt before, that I wasn't so different. It was pure validation. After years of being the other, suddenly she was the focal point.
Wow.
She admitted she fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. It wasn't just about the money. It was a starving person finally being fed approval, being treated as a woman rather than an outcast.
But this is where the story takes that steep turn. Because she didn't just stay in catalog modeling or fashion, she moved into explicit films. And usually, the narrative the tabloid spun around this was either she was wild and promiscuous or she was just greedy.
And the reality, according to the sources, is neither of those things. It was a frozen pipe.
A frozen pipe.
Literally. We need to set the scene for the hardcore decision, as the industry calls it. She's 18. She's left home. She is living in a caravan with her fiancé.
A caravan in the UK, in the middle of winter.
Correct. And if you've never spent a winter in a caravan in Britain, let me tell you, it is bleak. The pipes froze. They couldn't shower. They couldn't flush the toilet. Bills are just piling up on the table.
That sounds like a nightmare.
She described it as essentially being homeless, but with the tin roof that didn't even keep the cold out.
That is a completely desperate situation.
It is total survival mode. And that is when figures from the adult entertainment industry stepped in. And they didn't just wave cash around. They used a very specific, very effective tactic.
There.
Normalization.
What do you mean by normalization?
They told her, look, everyone is doing it. They framed it as this common, easy solution to her immediate crisis. Why freeze in a caravan when you can do this one explicit shoot, pay off the debts, and fix the heating?
It's incredibly predatory, isn't it? Catching someone when they're literally freezing and offering them a warm room if they just sign on the dotted line.
It is coercive economics at its finest. She calls herself young and stupid for agreeing, but honestly, she was cold and she was broke. She made the jump into explicit films not because she wanted to be a star, but because she wanted to flush her toilet.
And reading her reflections on it later in the sources, the regret seems almost instantaneous.
It really was.
Yeah.
She talked about feeling like her last piece of privacy had been invaded. She realized very quickly that this wasn't just a job you clock out of. It was a brand that burned onto you.
This is something I really wanted to ask you about, actually. She mentions a stark difference between the UK industry and the US market. Like, if she had been doing this in Los Angeles, would it have been a different story?
Night and day. And she saw this firsthand. She filmed a documentary later in her career where she visited LA. She met stars who were huge in the US scene. And Sinclair was just shocked.
Shocked by what the content they were making.
No, the lifestyle, the status. In LA, the adult industry was flashy, lucrative, almost celebrity adjacent. You could do adult films and maybe cross over into a bit part on a mainstream show or be a radio personality. It was treated as a business.
And in the UK?
It was a dirty little secret. It was a scarlet letter. The UK market was secretive, heavily stigmatized, and socially crippling. Sinclair realized that by doing this work in Britain, she had effectively nuked her chances of ever working in mainstream television. She was tainted goods in the eyes of the British media establishment.
Which is so incredibly hypocritical because that exact same media establishment was making millions selling newspapers with her face on them every day.
Precisely. The British tabloids fed off her while simultaneously judging her. And that hypocrisy reaches its absolute peak when we get to the Robert De Niro chapter.
Okay, yes, we have to talk about this because when I saw Charmaine Sinclair and Robert De Niro in the source notes, I thought, wait, the Godfather Robert De Niro?
The very same.
How does a girl from a freezing caravan in Surrey end up dating one of the biggest movie stars on the planet?
Well, from 1993 to 1995, they were in a relationship. And if you ask Sinclair, it was boring.
Boring.
She called it a normal, clean relationship. They were together for 2 years. They kept it private for 5 years total, included the time after they broke up. By all accounts, they just got along really well.
But the tabloids, they couldn't handle normal, could they?
Absolutely not. Glamour model dates Oscar winner isn't juicy enough for them. They needed it to be transactional. They needed it to be seedy. The Sunday Mirror ran these massive reports alleging she was a high-priced escort.
An escort, just completely inventing a narrative.
Yes. They claimed she charged £3,000 a night and that De Niro was paying for her company. They stripped the relationship of any genuine human connection and reduced it to a financial transaction.
That must have been so infuriating for her.
It was straight up libelous. De Niro's lawyer actually went on record denying he ever paid for anything. Sinclair has always maintained they parted amicably as friends, but the narrative was already out there. The public didn't want to believe that a woman who did explicit films could just be a girlfriend. They needed her to be a sex worker.
She has this quote about that stigma, which I think is just brilliant. She says, if a girl types in an office all day, she doesn't go home and type all night.
It's a perfect analogy. She was arguing for the separation of labor and life. Just because her job involved sex didn't mean her private life was for sale. But the 90s public, they couldn't separate the two. To them, she was her job.
It feels like she was fighting a war on two fronts. On one side, you have the moral judgment from the press. On the other side, the racial dynamics of the glamour industry itself. We touched on her childhood, but how did that play out in her professional life?
The UK glamour scene in the 90s was described in the sources as doggedly European. It was just a sea of blonde hair and blue eyes. That was the page 3 ideal.
And for you listeners who aren't British, page 3 was a literal page in the Sun newspaper that featured a topless model every single day. It was a massive, unavoidable cultural institution in the UK.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was very, very white. Sinclair was often the token inclusion, the exotic look, as they called it back then, a term that really makes us cringe today. But she was incredibly successful despite all of that resistance.
Yeah.
She was featured in the Playboy Book of Lingerie something like 10 times.
Wow.
Yeah. She was a monthly fixture in Club magazine. She really dominated that space.
So she broke the ceiling, even if the ceiling was made of, well, questionable men's magazines.
She did, and she took pride in that. She proved that you didn't have to look like the standard English rose to be considered beautiful or valuable.
Yeah.
She forced the industry to broaden its scope, even if just a little bit.
Now, we've talked a lot about the heavy stuff, the bullying, the frozen pipes, the libel from the Mirror, but we have to talk about her actual filmography because some of this is delightfully campy.
Oh, it's fantastic. If you look at her acting credits, it's not all serious adult content. She had a recurring role playing a character named Samantha Spade.
Samantha Spade! Please tell me she wore a trench coat and a fedora.
A trench coat and not much else, I assume. It was this softcore, sexy, private eye series. It's silly, it's low budget, and it's clearly meant to be fun.
It sounds like a parody of itself, honestly.
It basically was. She also had a lead role in an Italian comedy film called Couscous.
Cuckoo!
Yeah, and she was a presenter on a cable TV show called The Sex Show. She was a working entertainer. She wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was actively trying to build a broad portfolio.
But then we circle back to the lemsip. The wounded bird on the couch. She hits 27. She's arguably at the absolute peak of her fame and earning power, and she just stops.
The prude turn, that's what she called it.
The prude turn, that's her phrase.
Yes. She told the interviewer that by her late 20s, she'd become a bit of a prude. She stopped going topless on beaches. She refused to do certain photo shoots. She basically said, I've been there and done that.
That is fascinating. It's like she gave so much of her body to the public for 10 years that she finally decided, okay, that's enough. The rest is mine now. You don't get access anymore.
Precisely. It was a complete reclamation of her privacy. She retired around 1999, right at the end of the decade, and her life after that, it completely vanished into normalcy, which is exactly what she wanted.
So what does a retired 90s glamour icon actually do?
Apparently, she becomes a fitness instructor.
Nice.
And she actually went back to hairdressing for a while. Talk about a full circle moment, right back to where she started at 16.
That's amazing. And she became a mom, right?
Yes, a mother of 2 daughters. And what I love most is looking at her personal interests listed in her bio. Because, again, it completely shatters the stereotype people had of her.
What kind of interests are we talking about?
Well, she loves martial arts, water skiing, fast cars.
Okay, so she sounds like a literal action hero.
Right, and she's an avid reader, but not romance novels or anything like that. She reads true life murder books and gangster novels.
See, that's exactly what I mean. If you sat next to her on a bus, you'd think she's this quiet, retired hairdresser reading a gritty crime thriller. You'd have absolutely no idea she used to date Robert De Niro and was on a cover of Playboy.
And that anonymity, that was the ultimate goal for her. As she looked toward getting older, she said something that I think is the most poignant line in all of the source material we reviewed.
What was that?
She said she was actually looking forward to aging because she wanted to be treated as a person and not a threat.
Treated as a person and not a threat, that lands really hard.
It does. It implies that for her entire adult life, her sexuality, her race, her public image, it made people defensive. It made them attack her or judge her constantly. She felt like her mere existence was confrontational to people.
And she just wanted to be.
Decent. She said she wanted to be respected as a decent person who did a job to pay the bills. Nothing more, nothing less.
It really reframes the whole 90s tabloid era, doesn't it? I mean, we look back at that time with a bit of nostalgia now, the fashion, the music. But for the women in the center of it, it was a grinder.
It was a massive consumption machine. It chewed people up. Charmaine Sinclair's story is a stark reminder that the glossy image on the magazine stand is usually hiding a much more complex, often much sadder struggle for survival. She didn't want to change the world. She just wanted to get through the winter in that caravan.
And eventually just be left alone to nurse a cold in peace.
Exactly.
Well, that is a lot to think about next time you see a headline judging someone's choices. There's almost always a frozen pipe or a childhood scar somewhere in the background that you can't see.
Always. Context is everything.
But it leaves you with a really provocative thought to mull over, especially today. If Charmaine Sinclair had come up in our current era, with the internet and direct-to-audience platforms where creators own their content and their profits.
Oh, that's a great point.
Right. Would she have been able to own her narrative and keep the money without the tabloid exploitation? Or would the psychological toll of that kind of exposure just be crowdsourced instead of driven by newspaper editors? It's something to think about as we navigate the modern creator economy.
It's a completely different landscape now, but the human element is exactly the same.
Thank you for taking us through that today. A truly fascinating human look at a 90s icon. We will catch you on the next deep dive.
Looking forward to it.